Thanks, Seneca. That was a great 30 minutes that we played. Yeah. Hi. The title of my talk is Ceilings and Floors, and I'm hoping to weave together a few reflections on some interests and hobbies that I've had in a way that might create an idea worth spreading, which I think is the TED mission, and may also end up transforming some of the ways we think about what we're doing at school, inside the classroom and outside of. So I'm going to start by sharing a few things that may not immediately make any sense or may seem random or non-referential, and I'm hoping I can turn them to some use. The first one, a phrase, control the center. The second one, knees. Now, there are some people who might have the same hobbies that I have who know what these things refer to. Let's see if we can unpack these and see what these have to share, what these have to do with an idea worth sharing. First, control the center. I don't know if we have any chess players out here, but chess is something that I'm trying to learn these days. And one thing that you learn when you learn chess is that you learn that you lose all the time. And when you first start, you lose in ways that you don't understand. And you are moving pieces around the board, but you're also moving them in ways that you don't quite know why. And whenever we start to learn something, we're always grasping for some kind of handle, something to hold on to, something to shape and give some purpose to what we're even trying to do. How we're even losing needs some shape. And so I sought out a friend of mine who's a chess expert, and he said, control the center. That's what you got to worry about. That's what you got to think about. And so now I still lose all the time. But as I slightly get better with every loss, I continue to say this phrase to myself, and it continues to grow with me as I'm learning the value, the complexity, the subtlety of what it means to control the center. And if I ever get over a 600 rating on chess.com, I'm sure that I will continue to remind myself to control the center. This phrase will never go away as something it's worth thinking about and remembering. The second one, same idea, knees. I don't know if anybody out there has ever tried this ball and cup game, kendama, but most people, when they start kendama, they start like this. They do this, it hits, and it falls off. And while you do that, you can do that a lot of times until someone says to you, knees. That's the easiest trick in the book. But the point is, bending your knees to catch the kendama ball in the cup is the most important first thing you can learn. But even if you watch the experts on YouTube, and I would recommend if you have a little bit of time on YouTube to go check out some kendama experts, they can do some pretty wild things. For those experts, knees is still the most important bit of advice that they have. The advice, the guidance grows with the performer, and no matter how expert they get, it continues to have value. And so I'd like to introduce this idea of for me, these two imperatives that I've come to know through hobbies that I've wanted to learn later on in my life, I've come to think of them as low floor, no ceiling bits of guidance, in the sense that the barriers to do this, the barriers to think about control the center, the barriers to using your knees more if you're trying to land a trick, is an entryway for the very first beginners. And yet, there is no ceiling to how much value, how much depth, how much complexity that message continues to have as you get more and more expert. And I think the ways that we learn hobbies is maybe a good way to think about how we learn anything, right? How do we focus on the most important things that invite everybody, from a beginner to an expert, to the next stage of their growth, to the next stage of their development as a learner, as a practitioner. So I don't, Ted says these are ideas worth spreading, and of course, because this is an idea worth spreading, I think other people have come up with it. It's not my own. You might see, you might be familiar with the University of Cambridge Faculty of Mathematics has an Enrich program, and they discuss low threshold, high ceiling tasks. These are mathematical activities that students can engage in that the very beginners will find it to be challenging and worthwhile engaging in, and even mathematical experts, the same task provides them with something that can stretch their skills and something that they find challenge in. So it's a phenomenon or an idea that's connected to mathematical education, most prominently through this program. The idea of low threshold, high ceiling came from a computer programmer at MIT in the 70s who wanted to create a coding language that allowed little kids to code, but could also be used for the more complex coding challenges by expert professional coders. It also is a phrase that gets associated with language acquisition teaching, of course, right? That any activity that a language learner, even the most beginning, could engage in, but would continue to provide value as you gained more command of a language. So it's not my own idea. The phrasing may change a little bit, but I do think it's worth thinking about, and I'd like to continue to introduce to you how I think about this and what I think this has to do with learning and what we're doing perhaps here at OSC. So before we go on, I'd just like to ask, I'm assuming that every single person in this room has spent enough time doing something, Pokemon, for example, where you've achieved some level of advanced familiarity. I'd like to challenge everybody in the room to think about, what have I dedicated enough time to that I get it pretty well. I'm expert in this, and I know that Scott's already announced his expertise in Pokemon. So think about it. What is the area, any task, any activity that you have that you feel you've achieved some advanced familiarity with? Maybe not expertise, but close. Do you have one? I hope. Okay, so now think about this. If you had to give the best guidance you could give to anybody who wanted to either begin in that activity, in that engagement, or someone who's really as familiar with it as you, what would you agree on is the number one best, most essential thing that you should always keep in mind if you want to do this? Just like if you're doing kendama, always remember, bend your knees. Playing chess, always remember, control the center. So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you to turn to the person next to you. If you don't mind sharing, I'm pretty familiar with this, and I think the number one piece of advice for anybody, from the first beginner to the advanced expert, would be this. Try it out. Turn to someone sitting next to you. Thank you for engaging in that activity. The reason I asked you to do it is because I think what I would like to suggest is an invitation for us all, with whatever ideas we find are worth spreading. It's worth it to think about them in terms of, what message do I have for anybody that anybody could find value in, hearing once, hearing again, remembering, holding on to. When you lose your place or you're struggling, you can always come back to, and it always is a useful thing to remember. And if we frame the way we think about learning, if we frame the way we think about expertise, if we frame the way we think about guidance in those terms, if you forget everything else, if everything else is not making sense to you, always remember knees, or control the center, or whatever it is you just shared. And I think that as an educator in teaching language and literature, one of the things that we try to do here at OSC is we try to find those low floor, no ceiling bits of guidance for all of our students. So one of the ones that we've come up with along the way, and I think everybody knows what writer's block is, or everybody knows what it feels like to try to get your writing perfect in any language that you're operating in. And one of the things that we found really successful is say to students, no matter what, write your way into thinking. Don't think your way into writing. And anybody who's sat at a computer needing to write something and found themselves staring out the window for an hour thinking knows that this can be a valuable bit of guidance, right? Set a timer and just let the words flow. You might surprise yourself with what you come up with. Write your way into thinking. Don't think your way into writing. So for students who need to say something in their writing, we want them to always remember this. If you're ever stuck, you can always just start writing and see what you come up with. And And this is good advice even for students who are just entering into learning a new language. No matter who you are, letting your language flow and not getting in the way of it, regardless of how much you know of that language as you're learning a new language, that's valuable, that's beneficial, that's going to invite you to the next level. Or novelists or academic writers who get stuck, get writer's block, the best piece of advice they also can hear is just write. Just write. See what happens, right? So that's just one example, I think, from the field that I'm generally operating in, but it's a framing of how do we message things that we can feel confident we believe in are going to find every one of our students, every one of our colleagues are going to find value in, no matter how far along their journey to expertise they are. So I'd like to. We're all educators in one way or another. So this is the invitation I'd like to present to you all. So what is a low floor, no ceiling principle that could guide anyone to a lifetime of increasing success, expertise, enrichment, subtlety, depth, efficacy in some field, whatever it is you might be guiding somebody in? Take the time to think about it through that lens. Low floor, no barrier, and no ceiling. There's no limit to the value of remembering this, whatever it is, this bit of guidance. Sorry, that was my joke. I know in TED you're supposed to have a joke, so here's mine. Okay, you ready? My students are experts in being students, and therefore they have some low floor, no ceiling advice for me. You might have noticed that my slides are plain, would be a nice way to say it. For some reason, I just always do the original slideshow, but my students told me, no matter what, always remember. Your audience will always appreciate it if you just change the theme of your slides. So hopefully, this is also me offering a bit of receiving, being on the receiving end of this. So I actually had to do quite a lot to figure out how to get one slide to be different. So always learning. Okay, now the last bit here, and this might be a little bit, the closing might be a little bit philosophical, but here's a riddle for you, or I've been thinking about this. If we take this all the way back, what is the original low floor, high ceiling piece of advice? The first, best, essential, and always. And for me, and I think a lot of wisdom traditions will say this as well, whatever you do, don't forget to breathe. Right? Now, I'd like to ask you to try this. Try a deep, purposeful breath as you're sitting here. Whatever you do, no matter what's going on, it's always valuable to remember to breathe. Okay? And if we do that, perhaps that will be the first step to clarifying all the other things that we're working on and finding those most elemental principles that will support us, guide us to more depth, more complexity, and maybe allow us to articulate the ideas that we think are worth spreading more clearly and more beneficially to those we come in contact with. So, thank you very much.